mere seconds before, she's trembling in the back and like covering her mouth, and it looked like she's ready to pass out.
One Shane Douglas, the TV champion of ECW, versus Pitbull number 2, Anthony Durante. Shane, I've written it as Shane, but was led to the ring by Francine, looking stunning as ever, and 3 guys in black trench coats and motorcycle helmets with battens. They're your security, essentially. And there's the "Cut the Music" promo. Yes. Claims credit for putting Extreme into ECW and calling out wrestlers from other organisations, as we said previously. Gary Wolf, Pitbull number 1, is sitting at ringside in a neck brace, watching. So, the match from beginning to end, watching for the first time in 15 years, what did you think?
A little disappointed in what we delivered. Not as bad as I had sort of cataloged it in my head.
Oh, really? Did you imagine it as like an old? What did you imagine it in your head before you already watched it?
Yeah, I thought it was much choppier than it turned out to be. In reality, as I was telling Moose yesterday, so he's sitting off camera here. He'll hear this for the second time. I had been on plenty of pay-per-views at that point. This is just another night of work to me. But Francine and Anthony had never been on pay-per-view. And in the build-up to our entrance, they are getting more and more. Anthony was in the back just sweating bullets. I mean, he's scared to death. And Francine, as we near entrance, she starts to get really nervous. And she, right before we go to the curtain, she said, "I think I'm going to puke." And so when we go to the curtain, the first thing I said to Chris yesterday and looking at it is she recovered pretty quickly, because when we come to the curtain, she doesn't look any of that. Mere seconds before, she's trembling in the back and like covering her mouth, and it looked like she's ready to pass out. And I think for all of us, like once you get into that position and you're out through that curtain, and it just sort of takes on, hey, we've done this before type of feel. I did notice that in the entrance, when she made her entrance, she didn't stop for the kiss. And the smoke hanging in the air, which again was indicative of ECW's lack of budget. But in setting the match up and again watching the match, last night, excuse me, was the first time I'd watched this match in 15 plus years. When we set the railing up, or Anthony sets the railing up, and we do the drop behind it, and I'm going to give him the drop on the railing. By that point, if you watch how he's moving in the ring early, shuffling his feet, moving pretty limber, by this point, there's the heavy foot plotting. Dead giveaway, he's blown up. And he had blown himself up in that match because he was so nervous beforehand. Right. Probably wasn't breathing and moving along. When nerves take over like that, it can really be detrimental to the match. And when I go to pick him up to do the ass bump onto the railing, you see his other leg, instead of pulling in, which should be pulled up into a V, his other leg sort of lags behind and hits the railing and knocks it over.
And that's all due to tiredness.
Yes. Yeah. Being blown up, but also nervous. He's not thinking of how he's going to move his body. When we later put it in out at ringside, you can see that's an attempt to get the match back on track. In my head, I had sort of taken the match in a different direction because that spot screwed up. But now the railing ends up outside there. Let's go ahead and pick it up there and maybe get Anthony back on track. We had the built-in luxury of having Gary at ringside. And, when I get close enough, there's fisticuffs which draw my guys over to it, which was so well done, because I think when at the end of the match, and I don't want to get ahead of it, but at the end of the match, when we have the surprise come out of the dressing room, I don't think that anybody in that building was thinking it was a misdirect. They figured it was, what they expected it to be. But the match at second purview and watching it last night wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was, because of his nervousness and things. And I think both of them, Francine, I think adjusted pretty quickly and got herself into the role. And it was a hard position for her to play, because she's, the whole time I'm selling for him, she's in the behind role. So she's got to be showing her concern that way. And she came off a little bit almost baby-face-ish to me in doing that, but that's fine for her to do. And you can see her at points, she drops out. And at other points, when she pops back in, it's almost like me with Steamboat like forgetting that I'm in the match. Oh yeah, and I getting back into the match. You can see Franny doing that, but this is early on for them. I mean, this first pay-per-view would be nerve-wracking for anybody, especially in a company like ECW, because we didn't have the staff to walking around and say, having agents that could say, okay, calm down, guys, it's going to be like any other night. Things that you would typically see in the other bigger companies, we didn't have the luxury of. So had to go a different way, but not nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah. Tell Chris I'll only be a couple of minutes. I've just got a couple of follow-up questions. I know he's looking there, yes, grinding his teeth, trying to get the hook into you. Chris is, by the way, the owner of Appalachian Championship Wrestling. The big flag behind you, so you know. With that being said, I remember watching it, and I remember thinking the crowd was very quiet, and I was thinking that's almost indicative of the problem with the ECW crowd being overly smart, because they weren't reacting to when you were both trying to essentially work on each other's necks to play into the storyline that you broke Gary's neck. And any normal crowd with that kind of build, I say normal crowd, but you know what I mean, any normal crowd with that kind of build-up would be more invested in the working on the necks, 3 pile drivers on Pitbull, 2 Anthony, grinding away with the guillotine, that kind of thing. And it's sort of almost the crowd that ruins it to a point, because they're not reacting like a normal crowd.
Yeah, the ECW crowd by this time, this is when we're venturing, and probably right in the middle of the period where if you protect yourself with chair shot, they were going to boo you out of the building. If you didn't get your head chopped off, if a limb wasn't broken, if you didn't bleed gushes of blood, they were sort of reticent. And in some way, I don't think it was an overt thing by the audience. They were demanding more. And in this type of a match where the participant is at ringside, it's more nuanceable in what we're delivering in storyline, but nuanceable to what had transpired between me and this other guy at ringside. So I think this was the period that ECW fans had gotten, I don't want to say jaded, but they'd gotten spoiled. A lot of the guys that would come and the crowd would start to show antsiness or get quiet like that. A lot of the guys might start speeding up or giving to them, letting them dictate the pace of the match. In this particular match, we had a very specific story that we had to tell leading up to that attack from Gary at ringside that then brings the Rick Rude character out. So, that there were a lot of culminating points coming up in that match. And unfortunately, Anthony was just like the side show to that. And that's not easy to deliver at times. I think had that match been placed earlier in the show, might have received a little bit better response to it. Really difficult from a position of being the champion and having to deliver this storyline, still making Anthony at the time that this is all going to build to this attack by Gary. It's all nuanceable, and that's hard to deliver sometimes. And I think the biggest thing to me was in watching it was the fact that Anthony was so blown up at that point. And you watch him, the shoulders heaving and breathing and the plodding of the footsteps. And again, I remember vividly right before him, because they had started getting me a bit nervous just because they were so proxy. Nervous. Yes, it was a little nerve-wracking.